The path to mastery leads through the heart of adversity. Challenge is the raw material from which courage and strength are forged. Warriors are not defined by events. Warriors define them. Warriors conquer themselves before all else. Warriors are relentless in their service to others. Join us as we open our hearts and hone our minds to a razor's edge. It doesn't matter how slow you go, only that you do not stop. Your time is now. And now your host, Jason McKenzie.
Hello, neighbors. Welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Warriors podcast. And I am your host, Jason McKenzie. And it is a pleasure to be with you today. Let me tell you how you could support the show if you were so inclined. Like if you listen to the show and you are like, holy fuck, this guy is putting out such amazing content. He's helping people around the world. I want to share some pocket change with him. For example, let's say you were saying that. A great way to do that would be to head on over to patreon.com/mentalhealthwarriors and maybe donate $1 an episode. That would make me really happy, help me cover the costs, and help us get our message out. Another way you could do it is to share the episodes. Just share on Facebook, on social media, or whatever. That helps us get the message out. And last, and maybe... I don't know if it's the most important, but it'd be super helpful, and it's probably the easiest thing to do, is actually leave a rating and review on iTunes, because that helps us get found. And we're moving up the charts, which is pretty cool, but I want to be number one. Absolutely number one. And so if you would be willing to help me with that, that would be great. And now that is enough of the classless, shameless begging, and on to today's episode. So I'm not sure how many times I've actually started the introduction by saying I love this conversation, so I don't want to say that anymore. So I quite enjoyed this conversation with Adam Roa. So he's a really cool dude. He's a coach, and he's a world traveler, and he is, I mean, you know what? Just listen to the episode. He can describe who he is, but we had a really great conversation because back, a number of years ago, he was a struggling actor in Hollywood, like many people. Came to basically the complete end of his rope, and then just went on a completely different path, did some plant medicine, some ayahuasca, got some, new insights, and just embarked on a completely different life. And he's a very spiritual, type of dude. And he really is, he works with a ton of high level people to help them change their lives and achieve their goals and to, just perform at their best, but live a spiritual and fulfilled life. And what I loved about the conversation is we talked about some things that I've really been thinking about a lot lately, which is the idea, like how much power we have to actually shape our worlds. Like, I just can't believe, I can believe it, I guess, but I talk to so many people who think they're fucking powerless to do anything about their situation, or that they are a slave to their thoughts and they're a passenger on this, on this voyage through life and all that. And you know what? If you believe that, yeah, it's fucking true. It is absolutely true. But it doesn't have to be that way. And Adam has an amazing way of talking about that and helping people see that, not only what you believe is true. So, like, for example, if I think I'm a fucking idiot, I will look around me and I will find absolutely ample evidence that that's the truth, right? But if that's true, then sort of the opposite of that is true, which is I believe I'm capable and have a lot of value and am a great, a compassionate and kind human being. I will see all kinds of not only evidence that that's true, but opportunities to even do more of that, right? That's how it works, because our brains are like these expectation fulfilling, what's the word I'm looking for? They're expectation fulfillers. Let's put it that way. So we will seek what we seek, we will find all the time. So why not take ownership over that? Like, actually believe that and try something different. So this is really a lot of what this conversation is about with Adam. And I'm really passionate about it because I want people to understand that it doesn't matter how fucking hopeless you feel, or it doesn't matter that you feel like nothing you've tried has worked yet. Try something else. Connect with a new person. Like, if your life isn't going the way you want, then that's so you have ample evidence about how not to create what you want. So don't keep doing that. Try something else. I'm going to make a microdose about this maybe tomorrow, because I'm really passionate about how we should never stop trying to try some new things. But anyways, I love this conversation with Adam because he's one of those people that just makes me realize that, wow, I have a lot of personal growth to do. And I'm looking forward to doing it because I just found it really mind expanding and inspirational and powerful. And I felt empowered after we left the call, and it was kind of like skipping upstairs. I don't want you to picture me actually skipping. It's more of like a metaphor, I guess. But I felt really empowered and really made me want to do ayahuasca. And that's been calling to me. And I'm really looking forward to doing that and experiencing that and then telling you all about it. So I'm not sure how I'm going to go about doing that. I mean, I have met some people now that I think can hook me up, and I want to do it when the time is right. But I feel like there is so much that I need to understand and look at it in a different way. And I am really, really looking forward to making that happen. So anyways, I'm really talking about me now, and I should be talking about Adam. So listen, brother, thank you so much for doing this, doing the show. I really, really, really value this conversation, and it's amazing to see that the work you are doing in the world. And I wish you all the best, my friend. So listen, everybody, enjoy the episode, kick ass, and we'll see you on the other side. Hey, Adam, welcome to the Mental Health Warriors podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Jason. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. As we were talking before we started recording, you have a really interesting story. We were introduced through a mutual friend, Cam Adair, who's been on the show talking about video game addiction. And your story is really fascinating to me because it's one of, challenging paradigms and expectations, and really having the courage to take a leap and having finding the trust to take a leap to do something totally different. So I'm really, really interested in exploring that with you. So, why don't we start with just that moment? Like, tell us about your life and where you were at, and what was the situation or series of events that led you to want to make a drastic change?
Yeah, well, thanks. I'll give you the most abridged version I can, because it's okay. a story that spans many years. But essentially, I moved out to Los Angeles to pursue acting. That was my passion. That was the thing that was driving my heart in many ways, because acting, I honestly feel like acting saved my life. It was the way I was able to start to move through my stored emotional experiences. And so I decided I wanted to make my life about that. And when I moved to Los Angeles, I became the stereotype, I guess, of the starry-eyed actor, where it was, working as a waiter and then working as a personal trainer. And eventually I started recognizing that my entire self-worth, my self-esteem, my identity had become wrapped up in the quote unquote success or failure of my career. And every audition was like this emotional roller coaster. And every part that I would get, I would assign the value like, oh, this is going to change everything. And then when it didn't, going even lower. And I wound up having this year, 2013, which was the most difficult year of my life, where everything that I had assigned value to, everything that I was seeing as my identity, was in some way, shape, or form being broken and ripped away from me. And that was career, that was wealth. I had signed a contract and been misled and misrepresented into a contract that ultimately resulted in me needing to print out my bank statement and give every penny I had to get out of the contract from a abusive business manager. And so much, where I had a financial zero. I was starting over. My career was, there were so many close calls that were basically guaranteed to me and then taken away within days of starting shooting films and all this stuff. And then eventually it led to a car accident that would result in migraines for weeks. And I needed hip surgery. And 1 week to the day of that car accident, I walk out from work, and I was forced to work because I had no money. And so I was working through a migraine, walk out onto the street, and the rental car that I had been hit and run on the side of the road and just demolished. And this was exactly 1 week from the original car accident that totaled my car and resulted in so much pain. And I snapped, like my brain like broke. I had one of those moments like you see in the movies where it sounds like you're in like underwater and people are trying to talk to you and you're hearing like wah, 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 and like I couldn't. It was just this break in my brain of some kind, and I didn't know what to do. I was so desperate. I had been in a committed relationship at that point for 3 or 4 years. And I was adding up inventory of everything I owned, thinking if I sold this all on Craigslist, how much money could I get to go and travel and like reset myself somehow? And that's a big deal when you're living with someone you've been with for 4 years. And I'm telling her, you can't come. Like I need some sort of spiritual, mental, whatever reset. And I didn't have I was fully agnostic, borderline atheist, didn't believe in any of the hippie woo-woo energy connectedness stuff. And ultimately what happened is out of pure desperation, I wound up in an ayahuasca circle. And for those who aren't familiar, ayahuasca is an indigenous plant medicine from South America, an entheogen. Many people use the word maybe psychedelic. And so it's done in a ritualistic way, but I wound up through a series of events very synchronistically in this circle with a traditional shaman from South America and like having no real idea where I was. And literally from one day to the next, everything changed. I did a complete 180 into more or less the person that you're talking to today.
Oh my God, there's so much I want to explore there. So I guess I am super interested in ayahuasca, and that's actually on my to-do list in 2018. Wow. I feel like it's just calling to me for some reason, and I don't know why, but I think part of it is that, in my personal journey of personal development, like I've gotten, I think pretty, I've self-awareness. I spent a lot of time thinking about it and trying to do things to develop it. And I know I've made progress, but I know there's like will be for the case forever. There's a million miles to go and there is no real endpoint. But I feel like there's so much of me that I don't truly understand somehow. And I can't really put my finger on it. But I feel like, and maybe that's what the calling is. I feel like there will be some real insight that comes from stripping everything away. And I'm not really sure how else to think about it other than the fact that I want to continue to do things to expand my mind and to eliminate the things that are constricting my mind, I guess. So how did you find that? Like maybe you could talk about what that experience was like and how exactly it changed everything. Because you still got to go back and integrate, right? After this experience.
Well, first, what I'll say to you is what you're feeling is so normal, and it sounds like you haven't done it, and so you may not be like surrounded by people who are regularly doing it, but literally, I'm doing it tonight. So like I'm very much I've entered into that world very strongly. I have a number of close friends who are medicine people and very much in what I would call a medicine tribe, people who are using plant medicine as a way of deepening their purpose and their connection and their celebration of spirit and of life. And so what you're feeling, the way you described it, is so accurate to how so many people feel, which is essentially, and I'll mind you now, how most of my clients feel when they start working with me, which is I feel like there's something more, but I can't put my finger on it. Like I don't know what it is, but there's something else. There's another layer here. And I think that plant medicine is a beautiful way of exploring the layers of reality and existence that are around us all the time, that our natural actually not natural, are nurtured, are curated, are societally induced ways of perceiving reality are not allowing us to be in communion with very often. And so I know I didn't answer your actual question, right? Which is, I want to make sure that I get back to it, which was, you wanted to know specifically about the experience.
Yeah, the experience. And when you said you did a complete 180, what was it about the experience that facilitated that 180?
Well, I'm an analytical dude. I'm a very logical person. I love science as much as I now talk about this kind of like energetics and stuff. One of the things that I feel separates me is I still approach esoterics with logic, and things need to make logical sense to me on any level of reality that we're discussing. And back then, not only was I still that way, but I also was a skeptic. And if it couldn't be scientifically proven, if it couldn't be like tangibly held in my hand, I didn't believe it. And so that was a really, I was raised Catholic. I was an altar boy. I tried really hard to find a connection to God through traditional religion, and it wasn't working for me. I never found that connection. And so I basically went the route of rejecting all of it, all of spirituality. And I think that what happened was there were enough things that evening that I was able to independently verify that there was no way that it could have happened. There's just basically too many coincidences. They piled up to the point where it would have actually taken a bigger stretch of my imagination to believe that they were all coincidence than to believe that there was some force at play here. And so at that point, the scale just tipped for me. And the experience itself, there was the experience of past lives. There was the experience of communicating with someone who wasn't physically in the room that was verified later. There was so much stuff that happened during those 2 evenings, because I sat a Friday night and a Saturday night back to back.
Wow, that's super interesting. So when you decided to, you talked to your girlfriend, I guess it was, who you were with for 4 years, that you had to go do this on your own. I mean, at that point in your life, you had been probably, you had taken a huge leap to become an actor. It didn't work out the way you wanted. How was your sense of, I guess, confidence in your own decision-making at that time? And how did you overcome the fact that, I guess, what am I trying to ask? Were you worried that, oh my God, this thing I need to do right now could easily turn out to be another disaster, like this whole acting thing? Like, how did you work through that and take that leap?
I think, like a lot of people, I was just desperate. It had gotten to a point where I felt like, looking back on it, I had a very high level of self-confidence. And things had come easy to me in life for the most part. Good grades, scholarship to college. I had won homecoming king in high school. It was just this humbling experience over years and years and years throughout the acting industry of being rejected over and over and over again, to the point where your self-esteem just takes this massive hit. And I guess that I was finally humbled enough. I was at the place where I was saying to myself, I actually don't know what I'm doing. I've done absolutely everything that people have told me. I've done everything I know how to do. I've applied all the things that I think I understand about how life works, and it's not working because I'm unhappy. I'm broke. I don't feel like I'm living a purposeful life. I just was so desperate that I was finally ready to allow another way of doing things in. Like that's to me the biggest point is so many people aren't yet at the place in their life where they're ready to truly open themselves up to another way of viewing the world, right? Like we can hear about people's, and there's people who are going to be listening to this podcast, literally listening to this podcast, hearing me talk about certain things and being like, this dude's crazy. like the way that I view life is what I consider to be abnormal to let's say popular culture, but it is something that is rapidly changing. We're seeing this awakening process in humanity and in the collective at a very rapid rate. And that shows up in mainstream culture as things like yoga studios on every corner and meditation classes being available and people hearing about things like ayahuasca. I think Cam was the one who just recently said like the statistic of ayahuasca in Google search is up like 10,000, 100,000% over the last like 2 years. It's just, this is something that the collective is starting to acknowledge and experience. And that's because, in my opinion, also as a collective, we're starting to realize the way we're doing things isn't working. Similar,
Yeah.
like as above, so below, as within, so without. What my story and what I went through is being reflected in the greater whole.
I totally agree with you. You know, it's funny. Because I think the way I tend to think about what you described is people tend to live, you know, it's what was it, Thoreau or whatever, you know, people live lives of quiet desperation, but people do have this sense that there is something more for them, but they are so locked in to, you know, their typical way of thinking or the paradigm or the lens through which they look at the world. And I think when people have this sense that, maybe things are good, but maybe there's a lot of things that aren't working, I feel like people have this fear that opening themselves up to a different way of thinking and trying something new as a result of that different way of thinking might actually make shit worse.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's this crippling, imprisoning comfort in the low-grade discomfort that most people experience on a day-to-day basis, right? And I think it's a really challenging thing to break out of, because for me, it was kind of similar to you. Like I needed to have a significant emotional event to wake the fuck up, basically. Like it was, my wife had passed away. I had been drinking my face off for a long time, running from, grief and all that shit. And I had remarried, and, it was like, man, I was really, really ensnared, like crazy. I look back on it now and it just blows my mind, but how ensnared I was in this like web of rationalizations. Because for me, as much as I wanted to stop drinking, I was fucking terrified of the alternative, man, because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if I was going to be able to function. I didn't know how I was going to interact with people. Like I just didn't have any tools to be able to imagine what that world might look like. So what I would do is I would just build up this level of fear that was actually better, a level of fear to the point where it was just easier to keep doing the status quo, even though it wasn't working for me. So one of the things I always talk to people about is just that, how fear actually creates more of what you don't want, right? So for me, I wasn't ready to admit it, but in my fucking heart, I wanted to stop drinking. But the fear kept me drinking because it was better than what the imagined alternative that I created in my mind. It's just so limiting, man. But I couldn't see it. I could not see it for what I didn't have the level of self-awareness I needed to be able to more objectively look at my thoughts and challenge them and question them and, seek out sources of new information. So I was just stuck. And it took a significant emotional event for me, which was my 9-year-old daughter, looking my drunk ass in the face and telling me she was disappointed in me. For me, that was the thing. But I think for people that maybe it's like, again, it's more of a low grade thing and there isn't a, something traumatic or significant or whatever. It's a hard thing to break out of.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that backstory, man. That's a powerful wake up call. And I
sure.
think that what you're speaking to is 100% true. And I look at it as it's our biology, right? And that's why so much of our growth in consciousness and awareness and finding happiness for ourselves requires a using our consciousness to override our biology. That's why it's often so difficult, because what you're talking about is how, as human beings, we have generally become a species where an unknown is more scary and more uncomfortable than a uncomfortable known. And it's because we know that we can live through it. So like, if I'm unhappy and I'm like, I hate my job, I just hate my job. Every day I wake up, I just don't want to go to work. But I know that I'm surviving. And so I know that I can deal with it. And so the idea of quitting my job and starting my own business, the fear of that unknown is actually, for most people, it far outweighs the discomfort of the known commodity. And that's something that is in our biology, because our ego mind, our biology is about keeping us alive. Like that's what it comes down to. And all of our ancestors, the ones who heard that like rustling in the bush or the tree and said, probably no big deal, they got eaten by like a saber-toothed tiger. You know what I mean? And like their genes didn't really get passed down. And it was the one who's like, what's that sound? Oh my God, what is that sound? And freaked out and put an incredible amount of value and fear into the unknown that more often than not survived. And so those genes got passed down. And so now we're not in these life or death type situations anymore, where the unknown is something that can literally take our life. Most people, the unknown is about an ego death. They're facing off with, like I did myself, with having to say, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not playing this game of life very well. And that is a huge death to the ego to admit. And so our biology becomes something that we get to recognize and get working for us, because like one of the biggest things that I do when I work with people is rearrange beliefs and neurological patterns and things to the point where the unknown no longer becomes a fear of what you might lose, because that's ultimately what it's being evaluated against. We're all so aware of what we might lose, but we can't see what we might gain. So it's not actually an even comparison. But the moment you become a person who faces an unknown situation and gets excited because you're like, wow, what the evidence that life has given me is that like things continue to get better. So the fact that there's an unknown here, I am stoked, because life is about to get even better than I know it to be now. Once you switch that and that becomes your default way of operating, I mean, life takes off in such magical ways.
Yeah, I love that. I so agree with you. You know, have you read the book Sapiens?
No, I haven't, but I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, so I'm reading it right now, and it's just fascinating to me. And it's interesting what you talk about, because in the book, one of the interesting contentions the author makes is that what separates us from originally separated human beings from the lower apes was our ability to imagine things that are not true. Right. So if you look at a chimpanzee, you know, they have language to say there's a lion by the lake, or there's a banana in the tree, or whatever. I'm not sure if chimpanzees actually eat bananas, but you get the point. Like they can communicate about things that are concrete and they're true. But for human beings, it was because if you look at our world and our social constructs, none of those things existed. So if even like government, culture, laws, money, you know, the idea of corporations, like all of these things had to be invented. And it was our capability, that capability in humans that separated us from the lower apes. But the flip side of that, like, while that's an incredible strength, the flip side of that is we can also imagine shit that's not true about ourselves, right? So about our own limitations and our own insecurities and our own inability to, make a change in our life and all that kind of stuff. And it was, I don't know, I just find that idea fascinating that, it's something that stems from looking at the purpose it served way back when we separated from the lower apes and how it's carried us forward. But there's always a double-edged sword to it. So I think it gave me a really interesting insight into how deeply rooted and where our ability to create our own emotional, mental prisons for ourselves.
Yeah, totally. And I would even go a step further and say what you believe to be true is true. Yep. So the moment you start believing that the world is unsafe, the moment that you start believing that you're a failure or you're not smart enough or whatever, that becomes your reality. And that's being more and more scientifically proven with like the study of epigenetics and the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza and so many others. But what we're recognizing too is reality is so subjective, right? You talk about like the observer effect, where it's actually the observer who collapses the electron from potential into actual matter. And what that means is essentially where we choose to focus, where we point our consciousness, collapses potential energy into physical matter. And so what you choose to believe about yourself and about reality becomes the truth for you. And your reality around you will reflect that back to you. And to put it in another way, right now, as people are listening to this, as you and I are talking, our unconscious mind is filtering out 93, 97, 99%, depending on what people think, of your actual experience, right? The bits of information that are coming in, the vast majority are actually being filtered out. And your conscious mind has instructed your unconscious mind over time and in the moment of what to filter out and what to allow through. And so if you have a belief, I'm not smart enough, right? Well, over time, that becomes something where your unconscious mind, because the ego's role is to make you safe and therefore make you right, the unconscious mind is going to filter out all the evidence that you are smart and capable, and it will allow to your conscious mind to experience all the evidence that supports the idea that you're not smart enough. And so that idea of what is true and what is not true is entirely subjective. And with your podcast being about the mental health warriors, it's important for people to understand that what you're telling yourself, what you're choosing to believe, is constructing the reality around you.
Yeah, for sure. Like what you seek, you will find. So why don't you try seeking something that doesn't tell you you're an idiot? You know what I mean? Like look for something else. God, I totally believe that. I mean, what we believe to be, believe to be true is true, and we will find ample confirmation of it everywhere we look. So, but I think what people struggle with, and I'm interested to talk to you about this, is this belief. So people hear you saying this stuff, or they hear us talking, and to a lot of people, maybe some of the people that listen to this podcast because they're seeking something else or they're seeking to learn. But I think for a lot of people, it sounds like horseshit that you can have this great power over your thoughts, because most people, or your beliefs, or the power you have to construct the world you live in, or the lens through which you look at the world. Because I think so many people, and I'm saying this from deep personal experience, feel like passengers in the story of their lives or whatever, and they feel like they don't have control over their thoughts. Or I think part of it too is that a lot of people don't have a circle of trusted advisors, say, or people they really deeply care about and they talk about important things around. So a lot of times all of these thoughts and these patterns, they just stay stuck in the echo chamber of our own head, which is really makes it even harder, I think, to shift directions and break out of it. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's just how I tend to be thinking about it right now.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And in the kind of personal development space, we refer to that as victim consciousness. So where life is happening to you. And so therefore you're kind of just along for the ride, and things are happening that are completely out of your control. And you're a victim to your circumstances. And there's so many places we can go from here, because it is probably the single greatest shift that someone gets to go through to transform their life, is shifting out of victim consciousness, taking responsibility for what they are creating. And for a lot of people, that's terrifying. It's incredibly scary to say, wow, the reason I'm drinking every night, and the reason why I hate my job and don't have money, like all of that stuff is my own creation. Like taking ownership of that is that's a mind fuck. And I went through it, when I was going through that really difficult year in 2013, and having to take ownership and accept I've created this. Is, like I said, a death of the ego in many ways. But the thing is that while we can see that as, taking ownership of what's not working is super scary, the moment you do that, you have now created the circumstances, the parameters of accepting that you can change it. It's true empowerment. When you take full responsibility of everything that's showing up in your reality, you've also taken full ownership of the fact that you can change it. The moment that you say, I'm a victim to my circumstance, the moment that you say there are so many things out of my control that I'm at the mercy of life in that way, you've also disempowered yourself to the point where you could say, no matter how hard you try, maybe you're just going to always be broke and unhappy. And so that shift out of victim consciousness is the foundational starting point for me of true empowerment and true joy. And it is the foundational building block of everything that I teach. So when someone contacts me about coaching, for example, or joining a program, I say, listen, you don't have to agree with everything that I say or whatever. It's not about that. But this one belief that we create our reality, that single belief is foundational to everything that I teach. And so if you do not believe that, my methods will not be effective for you, because it starts with taking that ownership.
So what conditions, based on your experience, both personal and with coaching people, like what conditions need to be in place for somebody to make that shift to taking, to accepting that they have, everything that's showing up in their life is their own creation? Because like we were talking about earlier, like even the victim thing, as shitty as that can be, hey man, there's something that's comfortable about thinking that you don't have any control over your situation to change it, as awful as it is. So what has to happen, or where does somebody need to get to so that they can make that shift? Because that's always something that's been really fascinating for me, because I look at myself and, it's funny. When I had this moment where I stopped drinking, and, I used to tell myself when you talk about the truth, or like truth being subjective, or I don't know if you talked about it, but it's something I say. Obviously truth is subjective, but, the stories I tell myself change over time. So they're like, when I first stopped drinking, I didn't know why it happened. What was it about that specific moment that allowed me to just decide that I was not drinking after failing a million times? And then then I started talking about how, vulnerability, and I was able to confront, my true self in that moment. And I think that might've been bullshit actually, but that's what I thought was true at the time. And as my own thinking and my own knowledge has evolved, I realized I'm not really sure actually what it was. And I'd love to know. And I think this conversation may give me some insight, but I'd love to know what it was about that moment that allowed me to shift. So I guess that's a long-winded way of asking you, what conditions have to be in place for somebody to be finally able to take ownership over their lives in that way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I tend to avoid words like have to or need, simply because they I've everything's so individualized and there's not a necessity, but there are things that show up over and over and over again. So I'll give you an example. When you say like what needs to be in place, the most common thing that shows up in those moments is that the discomfort of current circumstance is now outweighing the fear of the unknown, right? The discomfort of being in fear and taking a leap into the unknown. Once your current circumstance has become so uncomfortable that it outweighs that, then you go in the other direction. Now, the thing that I work towards is that the discomfort as a catalyst for growth, that's not a necessity. Mm-hmm. We don't need, there was for a long time, I think a lot of people assigned resistance and assigned struggle as the way that we change as human beings. So like sayings in the personal development space, like the breakdown leads to the breakthrough. And basically when people hit, even in like AA or whatever, where they talk about, rock bottom, it's like people usually enter the program once they've hit rock bottom. And yes, that is a really common thing, is when it's gotten so bad that you're just like, I cannot do this anymore. That's when a lot of people change. And really, it's not about resistance or discomfort. It's about information. And so we can change based on information that we receive. So it doesn't have to be tied to discomfort. It doesn't have to be tied to sadness or depression. But because of our biology, unless your development becomes so exciting and the unknown becomes so exciting that you actually are leaping into it over and over just because you want to, then what happens is it becomes very difficult to use positive emotions. It becomes difficult to use, when things are going great, to say, ooh, I'm still going to go and take this workshop, or I'm still going to go and quit my job and pursue my business because that's my soul's calling, but I'm making so much money and I kind of like my job, it's no big deal. Like that area of being content can be really detrimental to growth.
Yeah, for sure. So I would think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think that for people who are, say, first embarking on this type of transformation or personal development journey, my feeling is that probably most people do that based on, start that process based on discomfort because they don't know any better. I think once from my own experience anyways, and working with people, is that once people get the idea where they do step into, outside of their comfort zone and they do start trying new things, and they realize that, that's obviously where pushing yourself and that's where growth happens and all that kind of stuff. But I kind of feel like at the beginning, most people approach it from a place of discomfort at first.
Totally. And that's what I'm saying is that's the most common thing. So when you say like what has to happen, that's the most common one. But I'm hesitant to assign it as that's a necessity.
Right, I gotcha.
Because then what happens is once we create the reality for ourselves where we need to be uncomfortable to make major changes, now we're going to call in more discomfort. Right? Like if you say, well, I need to be uncomfortable in order to change and I want to change, what happens is you create discomfort because that's the way that you learn how to change. And so it's important that people recognize that it doesn't have to be a part of the experience, although it is by far, I would say in 90+% of situations, that's the reason why people decide to take those leaps of faith and begin these journeys, is because it has gotten so uncomfortable. And I think that the other aspect to this that is really valuable, and it's just slipped my mind just now. I'm like, where did it just go? But is
I
It'll come back to me. Hold on.
I never get these.
Go ahead.
I never get these back, by the way, when this happens to me.
Yeah, if it's meant to come back to me, it'll come back to me. I think that, I guess what I want to talk to is that the growth of an individual and their desire to go on this journey and this personal development, is, now I remember what it was. What you were talking about, where, they might be surrounded by a reality in which it's not encouraging them to do that. Mm-hmm. And that is because your entire reality, like your present moment, so as you look around the room, as I look around the room, as every word that comes out of my mouth, this entire present moment is the culmination of the entirety of my past. So what my current reality is reflecting to me is every decision I've ever made in my life. And so when you're making decisions over and over and over for years and decades that are in line with beliefs like I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I'm a failure, et cetera, life is unfair. When you make decisions from that place for so long, and then you look around, you are living in a reality that has decades of decisions at a certain frequency, at a certain vibration of fear and doubt that is surrounding you energetically. And so it becomes incredibly difficult for people to choose a different reality when everything around them is carrying the energetic vibration of all of those decades of doubt and fear. And that is why what you're doing is so important. That is why I started my own podcast, The Deep Dive. I started that because I recognize that we're living in a time where, although you may have no one in your life who's telling you that you can, you may have no one in your life who's living in a way that inspires you, you have access through the internet, through YouTube and Facebook and podcasts, to expose yourself to things that carry a different frequency. You can expose yourself to people who inspire you and start to listen to what they have to say. And so while people may hear this and be in a victim consciousness and say, yeah, you know what, that's bullshit. People are always saying manifest it. It's all made up. It's like, okay, cool. And if you go down the line of inspiring people who are changing this planet and who have changed this planet, you will notice common themes, such as they will tell you you are not a victim. They will tell you that you are creating your reality. They will tell you the modes and methods that they utilize to shift, such as meditation, which is one of the common denominators among all influencers and game changers on this planet. And that's not from me. That's from Tim Ferriss, who's interviewed them and has said that himself. Like, there are ways for you to gain access to things that lie outside the reality that you're currently experiencing. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're already doing it.
Yeah, I love that. How do you help people? So say somebody comes, they start working with you. How do you help people develop resilience? Because when you first start changing, how you look at the world, and you start moving ahead, and you're kind of shuck the victim mentality. Obviously, things are going to happen in this new trajectory you're on that are unexpected, or obstacles, or you're going to fall flat on your face or whatever. And how do you teach people to be resilient? Because I look at myself and I think, I'll give you an example that just happened to me recently. So I run mastermind programs, and somebody actually quit the program, and it's the first time that it's ever happened. And I got to tell you, man, it was gutting. Like, it was really challenging for me to, I understand the reasons and all that kind of stuff, but how I handled it was so much different than how I would have handled that kind of a event happening in the past. In the past, I just would have drank my fucking face off and tried to forget about it. Well, where in this moment, I really tried to, be present with those emotions and understand them and learn from it. And, all of those kind of things. And I felt like I was pretty pleased actually while with myself and how I handled it. Like it was super uncomfortable for a little while, but I felt like it was a very valuable experience. And I think that level of resilience comes from just, constantly focused on, the things that we're constantly being focused on the things that we're talking about. So how do you help people develop that kind of resilience so they can keep moving forward?
Well, that resilience is built over time, right? And one of one of the biggest things is just support. It's so much easier to be resilient when you have a support system of people who care. And so many people don't have that. So many people have been surrounded by people who are in their own victim consciousness and who are in their own fears and doubts. And so when someone tries something and tries to start a new business and it doesn't go well and it ends, those people around them say things like, I told you, like, I don't know why you thought you could do that. Or like, that's so common. And it becomes very difficult to bounce back and be resilient when the people around you are like, yeah, you probably never should have done that, versus having people in your life who you love and respect, who say things to you like, awesome, what did you learn? So how can the next thing you choose to do be even better? Right? Like how, and just build you up and support you. And so as a coach, part of my role, a big part of my role is being the pillar, being the support that someone can lean into. And then over time, what happens, and this happens without fail, I haven't seen it not happen, which is when we stop looking at it as win or lose or success or failure, and we start looking at it as win or learn and say, okay, everything that doesn't work out, I learned something that's giving me the skill set to ultimately create the thing that does work and is most aligned with my highest joy and my purpose and my passion. Well, after starting to adopt that, you're going to start to see it show up, and you're going to notice how when your relationship ends, how in your next one, you have all these new tools when that allow for deeper communication and more intimacy. And you're going to notice that when you leave that job, all of a sudden the new job that you have is more aligned with what you want in your life. And like all of these things, as you continue to lean in and trust, then you have evidence, right? We're evidence-based creatures. And so when we have evidence of all these times in our life where we thought things weren't going the way we wanted them to, and it leads to us trusting more deeply, and that leads to more evidence of how it does work out, we start to develop this resiliency because that's the pattern that we have, instead of the pattern of it didn't work out, so I quit and I never try again. Because then that's the pattern that you have. So it's difficult to have resiliency when that's the evidence you have in your life.
I think too, people, one of the things you talk about, one of the underlying messages I think that you're saying is you got to try, right? I mean, and I think what people do a lot is they intellectualize what they want the future state to be. And sometimes that's a challenging thing to do. But let's say it's starting a business, right? I mean, it never moves past. So they set this goal, and they invent this concept of something that they want to do, and it just spins and spins and spins in their own head. And what I always tell people is that fucking thing might not even be the thing. Like, so what you're doing is you're setting this goal. This goal, and then you're going through all this mental gymnastics of what it's going to take to get there and all the reasons why it won't work and blah, blah, blah. Like, but just fucking go meet somebody new today. Like, to me, I find this is something I kind of struggle with a little bit. Like, I think setting goals are important, but I also think they can be really limiting in the sense that we can put blinders on to all the other opportunities that are around us. And I feel like, for me, just continually working on trying to be fully present in each moment. So whatever it is the thing that's happening, I'm bringing as much and hopefully all of myself to bear on that moment, and then trusting that way of living my life will create like opportunities I can't even conceive of. So I don't want to say I've given up on goal settings, but this is all stuff I'm thinking about right now. I'm not really sure how to think about it. So I'd be really curious as to your point of view around goal setting versus, keeping your mind open to all the potential possibilities that you haven't even thought of yet.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Especially we live in a current paradigm where goal setting and vision boarding and stuff is all the rage. And so it's a really powerful inquiry to be in. And my opinion on it, and it's just my opinion, is that the goals that we set are like a mountaintop that we're saying, hey, that's where we want to go. Let's head in that direction towards that mountaintop. And the moment we take action, like you're talking about, now we're walking towards it. And the question that really we get to answer is, are we so concerned with getting to that specific mountaintop, or is actually the goal to have a ton of fun on the hike,
right,
along the way? Is that actually the goal, is to like have the best time with your friends and your family and just enjoy the hell out of the journey? And for most people, what they don't understand is that anything that you can conceive of right now, any goal that you have for your life is a limitation. And so it's useful. And don't get me wrong, it is that mountaintop. I set goals for myself all the time. And it's a limitation because you can actually only imagine a goal with your current level of understanding, your current consciousness, your current awareness, your current ideas of what's possible in the world. So the moment that you conceive of a goal, it is a limitation for what's actually possible for you. And as soon as you start taking action and you start moving towards that mountaintop, you might be like, whoa, look at this trail over here. Absolutely. And you might turn this corner and say, whoa, look at that. I didn't even know the ocean was right here. Let's go to the ocean instead of that mountaintop. And you kind of flow through life and recognize that things will open up for you that you didn't even know were possible when you first set the goal. And so if we put on blinders and we just say, I'm getting there, that's where I'm getting, we close down so much possibility. And generally, the possibilities that open up along the way to your goal oftentimes are even more exciting and aligned with your passions and your purpose than before, because by the time they open up for you, you will have taken so much action and grown even more deeply into the person who you're actually wanting to be in the world. And so once you learn that thing, once you listen to that podcast and you have that insight, and all of a sudden now you have this deep cellular change, well, now you're going to have new possibility. You're going to have new goals that you could set. By the end of this podcast, it's my hope that some people listening will actually have ideas that they didn't even have before listening to it. They'll have goals that they could think of that they didn't even conceive of before taking in this information. And being open to how that changes us and shifts us is massively important, because that sort of mentality incorporates change immediately, as opposed to, oh, I just changed, but because I'm so focused on this goal, I'm not actually going to incorporate and integrate any of that. And that's a disservice, in my opinion. Yeah,
I agree. And, I think so much of that, I love that analogy. And it's funny you said, but, you get up the mountain and you look over and you see the ocean. And as you were talking, I was actually going to say the same thing, which was interesting. And this is a great illustration of your point. And I had never thought of it that way. Right. So as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, what if you get halfway up the mountain and you turn to the left and there's this other fucking mountaintop you want to climb even more. So, which is awesome because that's a new, like you say, that's a new way for me to explain this to somebody that I hadn't thought of before we talked. And it's in all of these conversations, and even the ones that are seemingly innocuous, just two people having a conversation. It's, God, I've seen so often when you start letting go of, your fear of being judged and becoming more accepting of who you are in this moment and recognizing that, just because where you are right now doesn't mean it's where you need to be tomorrow. It gives you a freedom to have like way more powerful conversations with people, like the one we're having right now. And it's in those conversations that there's so much insight and growth that can happen in those conversations when you take your unique ideas and my unique ideas and we combine them together, and all of a sudden possibilities open up that we never would have thought of if we had just been, left to our own devices. So, yeah, I don't know. I find as I look back and I think as myself as a fucking regular guy in my 20s and 30s, and I think about all the superficial bullshit that I talked about, and that didn't lead me anywhere differently than where I already was. And so, yeah, and that's hugely important for people who may be listening to this who are just starting on this journey. I like who I generally work with as a coach are people who are incredibly successful traditionally in a business mindset. And so millionaires, tens of millions of dollars, people making $1 million a month, people who are on TV shows as actors, actresses. Like, I've worked with these people over and over and over again. And I can tell you that it does not matter what the goal, it does not matter the amount of money. Once you hit that goal, once you get onto that mountaintop that you've been marching towards, always the question that comes next is, what's next? What now? And so learning that it's not about reaching that mountaintop, to use that analogy, it's not about reaching there, because the moment you get there, you're not just going to chill there. You're going to say, oh, well, let's go to that mountaintop now. Or, oh, we're up here. I can see the beach. Let's go down to the beach now. Like, you're going to continue to move. And so if the only enjoyment you get is reaching the tops of the mountains, you're going to not enjoy the majority of the experience, because it is an ongoing journey. And at every level of success, it's the same thing. You hit a goal and you ask, okay, now what? Yeah, that's a really important point. And actually, it leads into something I wanted to touch on that you brought up at the very beginning, which is you're a actor trying to be an actor. There's lots of rejection. Obviously, things aren't working. It's affecting your sense of self-confidence and your sense of self. And I'm sure one of the things that you've learned, one of the things you teach people, as do I, and I try to practice it in my own life, is to not let my sense of self, I guess, be determined by the outcome of the things that I'm doing. So to try to, I guess, separate myself from the outcome in some way. But how do you stay motivated to keep moving if you separate yourself from the outcome?
It's a great question. I think that at the end of the day, it always comes down to intention. And so asking yourself, why do I care so much about this particular outcome? If the outcome is my goal is to get 100 people in a group program, that's my goal. And I'm so attached to that outcome. Why? Just starting there and asking that question, what is the reason that is so important to me? And oftentimes what we'll find is that we create this, the result, we actually assign a value of meaning. And more often than not, we make it mean something about ourselves. And so when we say, well, if I get 100 people in that group program, what that means is that I will have hit a new level of success. It will mean that my reach has grown to this point, or it will mean that my finances have grown to this point, and I'm making that mean this. I'm making that mean that what I'm doing matters. I'm making that mean that I don't have I won't have to worry about money anymore. I'm making that mean that like my parents will be proud of me. Like whatever it is, we assign the result and outcome a value of that generally means something about us. And that's where when we can disassociate that and just look at what is the meaning that we're actually searching for and disassociate it from the result, we can then work on that meaning. So if it's about my parents being proud of me or whatever, it's like, okay, why is that important? Where's that coming from? What's the part of me that's still seeking validation, specifically from my parents, but just from others? Why is that so important? And we start to get all these clues, and that's the journey of personal development. And what's amazing is you can arrive at fulfillment. You can arrive at feelings of abundance and self-worth and all of that with absolutely no external tie. There's no result necessary to make that happen. And so then the results become byproducts. So for me, my financial success, my happiness and like all of that, like, so my financial success or my impact or my reach or whatever, that becomes a byproduct of me going on the development journey and finding more fulfillment and joy and happiness in my life. And so the results are the byproduct as opposed to the focus.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And I've totally believe that. Like I had a situation happen to me last night where there's an opportunity, a potential opportunity that could be life-changing for me. And I just heard about it last night in talking to somebody. And my reaction to it was, fuck, that would be awesome. But at the same time, also having this really interesting, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a really interesting disconnection, from whether it happens or not, because I believe that, as you just said, like for example, having this conversation with you, and one of the things I do with myself, and I learned this from a previous podcast guest, but I try to tell myself, like I eliminate the who and I try to focus on the what. So right now I'm a man having a conversation with somebody. And that's really the only thing in the world for me. So when I hear about an opportunity like the one I was just mentioning from last night, I know that the fact that I am fully present in this moment with you is one of the key things that led to the creation of that potential opportunity. And whether that opportunity manifests itself or not, that's never going to change my, the fact that I know what I need to do and how the person I need to be in order to create more of those opportunities, which, some may pan out and some won't. So I think that's a really empowering way to live your life, is knowing that if I just try to continue to bring all of myself to bear on each moment, that whatever happens will happen, but it'll probably, I will have a pretty good probability of creating more of the kind of life that I want.
Yeah. Beautiful. And that's a big aspect of, to me, spirituality that becomes so beneficial to creating the lives we want to be leading, because there's what you're describing in many ways is a trust in like the universe, in like the plan. There's like a way that things are working out that is beyond random. And it's like, well, when I just decide, okay, this is what I want, this is the intention that I'm setting, and I consciously do that, and whether that's a goal or even just an idea or whatever, the moment that we set those consciously and get our unconscious, especially, on board, then what happens is, like I was talking about how our unconscious mind is filtering out our experiences. Well, our unconscious mind now begins to filter in the conversations, the decisions, the intuition that takes you one step, two steps, three steps closer to what you want to create. And so what you're saying is so beautiful, because yes, you said, okay, there's this opportunity that just showed up on yesterday. And you can say, if I set the intention, I would love this opportunity. Great. You're now going to start seeing and hearing and doing things that bring you closer to that. And that may look like this podcast, for example. This podcast was supposed to happen, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, originally?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So there's a reason why it got canceled, and there's a reason why it's happening now. And for me, the trust that it is happening now because it needs to happen now for that one person who needs to hear it in order to lead to the next thing, or it needs to happen now because I wouldn't have actually said the certain information had I not just come back from a 5-day vision quest in the desert. Who knows the reason? But I trust that there is a reason, and it's in alignment with what I'm calling into my life. And I didn't have that trust before I found my spiritual awakening. Because when you're trusting in the universe, you're trusting in something. And when I was atheist, agnostic, and I didn't believe in any of that, there was nothing to trust other than myself. And so it was all about how I could design it and how I could create it. And anything that fell outside of that was seen as a mistake or an obstacle. And so now there's just so much more flow in my life as I continue to develop deeper and deeper trust in the universe.
So such a seemingly paradoxical way of looking at it, by saying, I trust in something other than myself to make the shit happen I want to happen. And I agree with you, actually. And it's funny for me to say that. It's not funny for me to say it anymore, but I was just like you, the most quote, scientific, ruthlessly logical person. I thought I had it all figured out. And it was just crazy how limiting that was. So now I look at, I'll give you an example. I remember one of the things, I don't do regrets a lot. I don't really wallow in regret, but if there's one thing that I regret, I think it's probably, I can remember exactly where we were. And I was talking to my older daughter, who was probably, I'm going to say 7 or 8, maybe at the time. And it was a couple of years after her mom died. And we were talking, and I said, I don't remember exactly the conversation, but basically I said, yeah, she's buried in the ground, and that's it. That's basically the extent of it. And which I believed to be true at that time. And, as I went on this personal development journey, I've had some experiences that are, why did they happen or what did they mean? I have no idea. But I can remember, for example, meditating in the summer out on our back deck and imagining a point of light. And in that moment, for whatever reason, I fucking felt her presence, man. It was crazy. And why did that happen? I have no idea what happened. Was it the wind? Was it her actual presence? I have no idea. But it was a moment that opened my mind. The point is, what I felt was real to me, and whatever it meant. And it opened my mind so much to, holy shit, there's so much I have no idea about. And I don't even know where I was going with that, but part of my personal evolution has been just that, has been trusting in something other than myself, acknowledging how little I actually know. And, just being, being free to know that being myself and being present and, trying to continually challenge my own thinking. That's the way to create the life I want. But if you had talked to me at that time, oh man, you could never have changed my mind because I wasn't ready to hear something else.
Totally. I'm exactly the same. I was exactly the same way. And part of the shift for me is the logical understanding that, what's the difference between it being real or not being real? If you experience it, so if you have that meditation and you feel her presence and that leaves an effect on you and it creates something in you, it creates an emotional experience, it creates a change in how you're living your life or how you live that even just that week. How would it be different if it was, quote, real or, quote, not real? The fact is that for you had the experience and it created change. That would happen whether it's real or not. And so then it is real. And that's where we get back to you're creating your reality. It doesn't matter if some scientist is telling you, oh yeah, that's not true. What you're going to experience in ayahuasca, because it sounds like she's been calling you and it's only a matter of time until you do it. What you're going to experience in ayahuasca, for example, it doesn't matter if someone says, oh yeah, you're just hallucinating, or you're like, no, I was actually in the spirit realm talking to these spirits and this thing. It doesn't matter what is to just use the word real, because what matters is the impact it has on your life. There's right. No difference between those experiences if you take the lessons from them and you allow yourself to be positively impacted in the way. The actual only real difference there is if you say, oh, this isn't real, so therefore I'm not going to allow it to positively impact me. That's actually the only real danger in all of it, is to have an experience that's so transformative. And because you're of an attachment to an idea of what real means, saying, oh yeah, the spirit of my wife came to me, said these things, but I'm not going to apply any of that. I'm not actually going to listen to any of that because it's not real. Like, that's the biggest detriment. If it creates a positive experience in your life, that's real. And your brain is going to react the same way. I like to use it with schizophrenia, talking about how, a schizophrenic's brain will respond to the voices they're hearing the same way that your brain and my brain respond to the voices we hear. Right. And so, like, what is real? It's a firing of electrical impulses in our brain. Like, what is reality? We are creating it, and we are assigning meaning to it. And, that is why we are able and we are empowered and we are encouraged to decide what we want to experience in our life and choose consciously to dive into those experiences and watch as just the magic unfolds.
Yeah, I've had these conversations with my daughter who's 14, and she's very logical, I would say. And, so we talked about that same idea in the context of dreams. Like, if you have a dream and it's so vivid and you can feel and smell and experience it, just like, quote, real life. Is a dream real or not? What makes it real? I mean, to her, she's like, would you shut the fuck up and just, let's watch TV. But yeah, it's a great question. And I think what you're saying is so true. So listen, man, I know we've had you for a while here and I want to respect your time. So I guess, what do you see as being next for you? And if people want to learn more about you, what's the best way for them to find out what you're up to?
Yeah. I mean, things change so rapidly. I'm totally surrendered to flow. Right. So, things change quite a bit. I would recommend that people check out my website, adamroa.com, ADAMROA.com, because all things that I'm up to will always be on there. I also highly recommend my podcast, The Deep Dive with Adam Roa. That's available iTunes, SoundCloud, podcast app, everywhere. And then social media. Facebook's my primary and Instagram would be my secondary. So you can find me on Facebook as Adam Roa, Instagram, adam.roa. And then I'm also on Twitter, Adam_Roa. Like I have what someone said is a large online real estate. And, my first book just came out. It's called Cosmic Philosophy, A Month in the Light. It's not a traditional personal development book by any means. It's the result of a crazy series of events. Quick cliff note, ayahuasca ceremony. I was told to go to Egypt. 6 days later, I was in Egypt. I got connected to a group of people and wound up meditating inside the pyramids, all three of them, on the night of the full moon for 6 hours. I met a man from Brazil who gave me this crazy activation session where I started channeling just with my eyes closed through writing. And I wrote every morning, basically with my eyes closed, and turned that into a book. So it's a wild ride, and the information in there is incredibly dense. But if you want like a deep dive into frequency and an understanding of more of the mechanics of how we're creating this reality, that's what that book is. I'm super proud of it. And I will also be releasing a video course on how to unlock creativity in probably the next month, and then going on tour with my spoken word poetry show. I've toured internationally already, Australia, and I'll be doing Canada, most likely in late May.
Oh, whereabouts in Canada? Because I live in Canada.
The tour itself hasn't been designed yet, but we're going to do New York and then go up and around and do Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa. Like we're open to a bunch of different places. And, so if you know of places, we're also looking at potentially partnering with different organizations in different cities and doing maybe larger than just my show, and maybe making it like 4 or 5 hour half day kind of events.
Sweet.
So yeah, it's going to be quite a wild ride. I think I'm really looking forward to that too.
Awesome. I bet you are. Well, listen, man, we'll link to all that in the show notes page, obviously. And, I want to thank you for coming on, because this was great for me. I love having these kinds of conversations with people, and you gave me a lot to chew on. So, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of my audience when I say that you've given them a lot to chew on too. So I wish you all the success in the world, brother. And thank you.
Likewise, man. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care, man. Boom. Now go crush it. Like seriously, after listening to that conversation, how can you not go crush it? Try new shit. Connect with new people. Man, just release the baggage and try something else. So, man, like I said, loved the conversation, felt super inspired, felt like my mind was open. I felt like I thought of, things in terms of different possibilities. And that's why I love doing the show. So I'm going to end this one like I end every single fucking show. This shouldn't be a surprise to you. Although sometimes I wonder how many people actually make it to this point. So maybe next time I'll actually do something interesting and funny. But listen, if you have struggled, I want you to know that I have struggled too. And if you ever want to talk to me, I will not judge you. And what I just offered you, I mean from the bottom of my heart. You reach out to me, I will get back with you. And I will not judge you. And for all of the people who are afraid of being judged, you know what? The best way to combat that is to be the person that doesn't judge other people, and be that person unabashedly. Just fucking do it. The world needs more of it. And you will become the kind of person that creates incredible opportunities for yourself and for other people, and creates the deepest kinds of human connections that make life feel fulfilled and worth living. That is my message to you. So seriously, do it. Do it. Do it. All right. We'll see you next time, guys.